What's up there, guys? Welcome to Monday Night Live. This is Fanfare for the Conscious. My name is Rick, and welcome to the stream this evening. Now, I am going to be talking about some important information this evening. I'm going to be talking about the excess death rates that everyone seems to be quoting at the moment regarding the whole panicdemic, I suppose you could call it. I'm also going to be discussing the topic of involuntary euthanasia, i.e. murder. And this is specifically concerning the elderly and vulnerable population. I've heard some interesting anecdotes with regards to how they've been treated over the last, 9 months or so. And those anecdotes have been brought to me in a little bit more personal context lately, and I will talk about that in just a moment. Just going to make sure that I am live on Facebook. Yep, looking good over there. And just going to quickly check that I'm showing live on YouTube as well. We'll look to move forward from that. So just quickly check that up. If you guys do want to share it around, I will make sure that it is set to public, so you guys can share this around. Fantastic. All right, change that to public now. So if anybody does want to share this stream around, please feel welcome to do so. I am live on Facebook. I'm just double checking that I am coming through live on YouTube as well. Fantastic, we are live on YouTube as well. So welcome to the stream this evening, guys. I'm going to be talking about ONS data. I've been digging into that now for round about, I originally downloaded the data about 6 months ago, and I've been playing with it ever since. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about excess death first. I'll just quickly share this screen with you so you've got a little bit of information. And there we are, share screen, and we'll open up my ODS document. Let's see if we can get this up. That's very strange. That's not showing. Right, let me try that again, guys. Screen share. Let's just see if I can get this document up for you this time. Very strange. Doesn't seem to want to share it with you guys. That is a crying shame. I was not having any issues with this last time. It seemed to work just fine, but apparently it won't let me share this ONS data, which is quite annoying because I've actually got some rather interesting graphs here that I was hoping to show you this evening. But I'm going to talk a little bit about excess deaths first of all, because a few of you who, any of you who have been watching my channel for a while would know that recently I did a interview with Neil Sanders, and where me and Neil disagree on an awful lot of things, we did come to an agreement on one very important point. Was that no matter what your opinion on the current situation is, what is important to remember is that when you're measuring the impact of what has occurred over these last 9 months, the important thing to think about is the excess death rate, because it's the excess death rate which is going to give you an idea of the impact that this this whole thing has had on the population. And when it comes to excess, it's actually quite an interesting thing, because, and it's a shame I can't actually get this this screen up for you. If you just bear with me 1 minute, I'll see if I can share my whole screen with you, and then just quickly get rid of this. Oh, right, okay, there we are. Right, I figured out my problems. It is Rick not knowing how to use the stream properly. My apologies. Right, I can actually get this ONS data up for you now, and I'm going to click that on. There we are. Let's get it in a position where you can see me a little bit better. Right. So this is my ONS data analysis. I'm just going to zoom it in for you. So you can see I've not messed about here. I've really not messed about. I've pulled the last 50 years, thereabouts, of death rate data. So I'll just show you the raw files just so you get an idea of what it is that I've been getting. So those are the population estimates, mid-year population estimates for the United Kingdom, overall United Kingdom population there. So that's starting from 1971. I'm just going to zoom that in a little bit so you can see a bit better. So yeah, we started from 1971 there, and that goes all the way down to 2019. So we've got an idea of the population of England and United Kingdom in general. And the reason that I made a point of getting population is because when you're considering death rates, you've got to bear in mind that the population is going to naturally grow year on year. That's what we're seeing in this country. We're seeing a year on year increase in the population, which means that naturally you are going to get an increase in the physical number of deaths. As the population goes up, there are more people to die, therefore more people will die. Very, very simple. So whenever we're considering these death rates, it's important not just to look at the raw numbers. You can see the population there of 56 million there, and then we're down to like nearly 67 million down there in 2019. So if you want to correct for the rise in population, what you do need to do is you need to take these deaths. So here is some of the data I got from the ONS, and this is deaths registrations by single year of age from 1974 to 2018. So we've got that for the UK males and the UK females. Now, at the time when I pulled this data up, there wasn't a collated data for the United Kingdom for 2009. So what I did was I got separate information for England and Wales, which you can see here. These are the actual raw death numbers that we saw over the various years. And then Scotland as well. If we take that number and we add it to this number, then we get the total for the United Kingdom. And there you go, that's totaled there. So that was the total number of deaths in 2019 for the whole of the United Kingdom. 588,949. So that gives you an idea. You're talking about 500,000 deaths on a year-by-year basis, generally speaking, on average. So how? The first thing I asked once I got this data was, how does the ONS determine what they predict will be the number of deaths? And what they do is they take an average of the past 5 years. Okay, now superficially that seems, quite well balanced. Take an average, and that gives you an idea of approximately how many people are going to die in the coming year as a percentage of the total population. And you can see here in this table, I have taken the population number and I've divided it by the total number of deaths in that year to give you an average. Okay. Now, with the current data, this number's actually changed from 0.88 up to 0.91. But what I found very interesting when I took this data and I plugged it into a graph, let's see if we can get the graph for you. Aha, here we are. So this is mortality percentage, and don't forget, this doesn't go down to 0. This goes down to 0.75%, so 0.25% is the lowest value on this graph. It isn't 0, just to bear that in mind. So you know that I'm not trying to take you guys for a ride here. This is 0.75. This is not a 0 value at the bottom. This bar being right down at the bottom would indicate 0.25% of deaths. And let's just have a quick look. I'm going to zoom this out a little bit so you can see a little bit better. But I'm going to just scroll along this graph for effect, because I want you to watch and look at it very closely and see if you can notice a trend. Because I'm seeing a very, very obvious trend here, and it's something that you would expect in a reasonably technologically and medically advanced society. You would expect the death rate as a percentage of total population to fall. And that's what we're seeing here. If you look, 1993, it's all the way up here right by this green line, where you've got the green and yellow lines there. They're almost touching. The green line represents one of the averages. I believe that's the 10-year average. The yellow one represents the 5-year average, I think. Let me just double check that before I start misleading you guys. So there's your key. You can see the orange one is the running average. So you're averaging every single value year on year on year on year on year on year. You get cumulative average from the beginning of these records, 1970-ish. You've then got the red line here, which is the 20-year average. The green line is the 10-year average. And there's this yellow line is this 5-year average. So this should be what these guys are using every single year to predict it. Now, we've got a problem. When you're dealing with averages, averages are only really useful when you have what's called a normal distribution, which is this bell curve. Yeah? If you have a trend in the data, then an average doesn't really tell you that much at all. So anybody who's studied a little bit of science over their lives will understand this idea of something called a line of best fit. So when you see a trend, we go up to all the way up to 2011. So 2011 is the last one on this line. You can see a very obvious downward trend. So if I was looking at this data and I was to be asked to make a prediction about what sort of death rate you would see in 2012, based on this data, we draw a line of best fit that would approximately follow this. Probably be a little bit lower than this yellow 5-year average mark, actually, because we can see that it's going down. So taking an average would naturally, as you can see here, cause the average to be higher than the number of deaths. So let's imagine considering excess death rate for all these years. There was no such thing as an excess death rate because the trend is downwards, which means if you take an average, every year is lower than the average. So every year we should have had a negative value for the excess death rate. So excess death didn't really exist here because at no point is the death rate going above the average, nor would it. The trend is very, very obvious. It is a downward trend in the death rate. So as an overall percentage of the number of people in the population, this death rate is going down. And you can see it up here. If we go and have a look at actually the raw data. Here we are. So we've got various different expressions of the death rate. This is as a percentage of total, and these are the average percentage death rates. And you can see 5-year averages is showing around 0.89, 0.89, 0.89, 0.9, 0.91, 0.91, 0.91. But what you can see here, if we go to the raw values, let's have a look at 2011. So there's your 2011 data. This is, I believe, the lowest death, not only death rate, but death numbers that we have seen in this country ever, in United Kingdom. 2011, the lowest death rate ever. That was 0.87% of the total population, 552,232 deaths. Okay, that's the lowest we've ever had. Okay, and then it starts to go up. It starts to go up for the first time ever in the history of United Kingdom death rates. The death rate starts to go up. Okay, let's have a look at this yellow one. Okay, 1.04%, 1.02, 1.02, 1.03, 0.98, 0.96, 0.94, 0.94, 0.94, 0.9, 0.89, 0.87. Okay, we're seeing a steady downward trend in deaths until 2011. And this is the first time that we start to see what you would term to be excess deaths. Okay, deaths which are going against the trend and increasing. Okay, up until now, the trend has been downwards. Again, show you this data, show you this graph, Down, 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 down. There's 2011. And what happens when we get to 2011? It starts to go back up. And if you have a look at this yellow line, this is your average line, you'll notice that it lags behind the data. Even though the death rate, as measured, starts to go up from 2011 to 2012, 2013, it drops a little bit in 2014, but then goes back up in 2015, drops a little bit in 2016, but goes up in 2017, goes up in 2018. You've got a general upward trend here. Anybody who was looking at this data and trying to make a prediction would predict that the death rate was going to increase in the following year. So to take an average of those years is to necessarily deflate the expected numbers of deaths. Okay? This graph is clearly showing an upwards trend. This isn't a flattening, this is an upwards trend. Okay? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 data points there. I mean, even that one is higher than 2011 to 2014. So you've got 8 data points there showing an upward trend. Okay, so if you're honestly trying to make a prediction of the number of people who are going to die in 2019, you would have to predict that number goes up. You would have to. Okay, and if it didn't go up, you would have a negative value for excess deaths. Okay. And let's come back to this whole idea of excess deaths in the first place. There was no concept of death rates increasing until 2011. So excess death was not even a thing until we hit 2011. 2012 was the first time we saw a significant rise. And then it rose again in 2013. And it rose again in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, steadily upwards. Okay? So something was killing us anyway. Very obviously. Since 2011, the death rate has been increasing. Now, I am planning on getting a little bit more into the data and digging a little bit more to try and find out the details of who specifically, what age groups, are certain age groups being targeted more than others? Is it a general increase in the death rate? Is the increase in the death rate because we've got more old people? I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why we could see this death rate. But if you're literally, and this is what the ONS do, you can find it on their website, okay? They literally average the last 5 years, and they do it on a week-by-week basis. So they'll average week 1 of January for the previous 5 years and take that as the expected value for the number of deaths. Any number of deaths that occur above that average value are recorded as excess deaths. Okay? And this is the first part of the scam that I can start to see here. There is an obvious upward trend. Okay? Now, I will hold my hands up. I am no academic statistician. I know my statistics from my study of science. Okay? And this is how I understand how to interpret graphs and to notice trends in data. Because any scientist looking at this data could only conclude that it is rising. Very, very obviously rising. And that 5-year average, as you can see, every year is lower than the actual number of deaths. So we had excess deaths in 2015. Okay? We had excess deaths, and I'm going to find this the file for you now so I can tell you to the tune of what we saw these excess deaths. We can get an idea because what's being thrown around at the minute is that we've had 80,000 excess deaths in England alone. Okay, the prediction for the death rate in England was going to 528,000 was what they predicted. They predicted 528,000. Now, I'll tell you what the death rate last year was, okay, in 2019, not 2020. 2019, the death rate was 530,000. And they estimated, with this data proving that there is a definite upward trend, for some reason, they estimated that it was going to be 528,000 this year, despite the fact these deaths have gone up every year, year on year, without fail, since 2011. They predicted it was going to go down by 2,000 deaths. Now, I challenge any statistician out there to tell me why it makes more sense and why you would choose to use an average of data with a very obvious upward trend. To take an average of that flattens out all those values and gives them a mean, okay? It brings the high values down and brings the low values up. It flattens that part of the graph. They're pretending, by taking a 5-year average, that this obvious upward trend you see here, which is even shown by their 5-year averages, taken year on year, that there is an obvious upward trend. Now tell me now, why would the government, why would the ONS predict 2,000 less deaths in 2020 than there were in 2019 when there is an obvious upward trend in data? Why would they do that? It doesn't make any statistical sense, okay? Doesn't make any statistical sense whatsoever. And here's a more compact version of the graph, so you can really actually see it all on one sheet, yeah? That only goes up to 2018, but you can still see this really obvious switch in the trend. Yeah, it's trending down, trending down, trending down, trending down. It's 2011 and starts trending back up again, okay? If it was flattening out, you would expect to see, let's take this group between 2009 and 2013, 2014, you'd expect to see this up and down pattern continuing, okay, within a few points of a percent of each other, thereabouts. But it's going up. It's going up very, very obviously. And that's the issue I have with the ONS excess death calculations. Now, hold my hands up. I'm not saying people aren't dying, okay? I do think that a lot of the elderly and vulnerable people have suffered greatly during this panicdemic, lockdown, scamdemic, whatever it is that you want to call it. People have died and people have suffered, okay? I think there's a number of reasons for that, but I'm not willing to pin anything yet because I've not really dug into the data. But I suspect this increase in deaths, okay, has one, been exaggerated by the flawed prediction method, absolutely flawed. They're saying 528,000 was what they predicted was going to be the death rate in England this year, in England and Wales, okay? We can come over here and we can see, let me just get the England and Wales population, death rates. Death rate, England and Wales. There we are. Okay. Here we go. 530,841. Right up there at the top. I'll zoom in so you can see it. 530,841. Okay. The year before, 541,589. The year before that, 553,253. The year before that, 525. Okay. So we've got very obvious upward trend. All right. Let's go from 2011. Okay, 484, 484,000, 2012, 499,000, 2013, 506, 2014, 501, 2015, 529, 2016, 525, 2017, 533, 2018, 541, 2019, 530, okay? We've got steady upward increase, and if we show them as percentages of total population, which is how we should do to correct for population growth. Again, 0.87, 0.89, 0.9, 0.88, 0.93, 0.91, 0.92, 0.93, and that's actually 0.91 as well. And this data isn't actually correct. This is my old file. I do have a new file that I'm putting together at the moment with updated data. But you can see there's that very, very obvious upward trend, even as a percentage. And the fact that they've predicted lower than the 2019 death rate for England and Wales in the time of a pandemic, supposed pandemic, yeah, let's get this straight, just smacks of ridiculousness to me. That is a very obvious underestimation. And why do I think they've underestimated this? To make the deaths seem worse than they are. Again, not saying that people haven't been dying unnecessarily. I firmly believe that they have. I know that they have. And I've got a few ideas as to why. So let's move on a little bit from this raw data. I will provide, once I have done my final analysis and I've dug out all this data, I will provide a link to a Dropbox file where anybody can come and investigate the documents and have a look at my analysis with the raw data right there, with links to all the tables. However, this one is not particular. This isn't really ready for presentation. This was more just sort of a rough bit of work that I was doing. Again, there's another example. So yeah, there's your 20-year running average. That gives you a better idea of where we should have expected the death rates to be in 2019, based on, you know, the upward moving trend. And the yellow line there, or is it the orange line in this one? No, the yellow line is showing where that excess death calculation should be. Now, it's important to note that in this data, 0.01% of the population is equal to about 6,500 people. 6,500 people. So it would only take 0.1% to produce 60,000 excess deaths. You would only need to see this increase to around about the 1% mark to see 60,000 excess deaths. That's 0.1% increase in death rate. Okay, 0.1%. So not a huge number, not a huge number by any stretch of the imagination. Again, once I get more accurate 2020 figures, I will be able to give a more detailed explanation of what I think is actually going on here based on seeing the changes in the individual death numbers. But I thought that was really important to bring your attention to, because it's the basis upon which the whole risk has been based. This idea of excess death, which, as we mentioned before, wasn't even a thing until 2011. The whole idea of excess deaths wasn't even a thing until we got to 2011 and the death rate started going up. They are murdering us, and they've been murdering us since 2012. Since 2012, we've seen this steady uptick in the percentage death rates, which does naturally correct for population. So before anybody out there says, oh, well, you've not corrected for population rate. Yes, I have. It's a percentage of the total population. Therefore, it is corrected for population. Because that percentage is per 100, quite literally it is per 100. So therefore, it is correlated to the actual population of the United Kingdom. Here I started to have a little bit of a play with the age groups to see where I could see any changes in the death rates themselves. And unfortunately, it was fairly inconclusive. Now, that may be the way I've chosen to present the data. But again, like I say, once I get more up-to-date figures for 2020, I'll be able to let you know about that in a little bit more detail. Right. So let's just get rid of that screen share. And let's talk now about this idea of involuntary euthanasia, also known as murder. Involuntary euthanasia is quite a fluffy word for it, but it is murder, basically. Now, I decided to bring this up because when I first started investigating this whole scam, I became aware of a lot of people sharing information which would indicate that the elderly and the infirm were not being looked after correctly in hospital. I'd heard rumours of seniors being forced to sign do not resuscitate forms. I'd heard rumours of them basically just being left to dehydrate and starve and sort of locked away without any sort of interaction and without much attention whatsoever, refusals to treat. I've heard of all sorts of awful things happening to our seniors. People being refused access, people being not allowed to go and see their grandmas and their granddads and to help look after them in hospital. I even saw a video of a woman who was a nurse who went to take her own mother out of a care home to bring them into their home and look after herself. Okay, The care home called the police on her and had her arrested for trying to rescue her own mother from a care home. And this was shared about on Facebook. There might be some people out there who've actually seen this as it was being shared around. But that amazed me that sort of thing was actually happening. Now, I heard a personal story from somebody who is directly involved in it. And so this lady that I know, her great auntie has been taken into hospital recently, and she was taken in with gallstones. Not gallstones, sorry, with kidney stones. Now, the first thing, they refused to treat the kidney stones. They brought her in, they kept her under observation, refused to treat the kidney stones. According to them, and this is what the lady has told me, their excuse was basically, oh, she can't wash herself, she doesn't have a quality of life, she's better off if we just let her die. That was from the hospital staff, okay? I wouldn't expect my dog to be treated like that by a vet, okay? I wouldn't expect the vet that I took my dog to refuse to treat them because they don't think they have an appropriate quality of life. I'm sorry, Mr. Doctor, Mr. Vet, that's not your decision to make. You are not God, okay? The person or their family are the ones who decide whether that person has a decent quality of life or not, whether they have a decent enough quality of life to continue living, right? That is not a job for doctors to make. That is not a job for the doctors to make. They should not be making that decision. So because she wasn't treated for the kidney stones that she went into hospital with, this is at Manchester Royal Infirmary, I'm going to name and shame them, Manchester Royal Infirmary. They refused to treat her for the kidney stones, and then she started suffering from sepsis and got very, very ill. Now, initially, they started treating her with IV antibiotics. And the family was told on the 1st of January, on New Year's Day, that their auntie had tested positive for coronavirus. Okay? Interestingly enough, obviously they were refused access at that point. They were told that she had to be isolated for 14 days and the family couldn't get involved with it. But the family were a little bit suspicious. And one of the family members was able to sneak into the hospital and go and see their auntie. And they went to go and have a look through the files. Now, what they found when they went into the hospital and they checked the files, they found out that the coronavirus test had been done on the 5th of January, not on the 1st. And the family were told on the 1st of January that she had coronavirus, that she tested positive, when the documentation in her file had the test as occurring on the 5th of January. Okay? So one great big, alarm bell right there. They've tried to push this idea of her having coronavirus onto the family, and the family's not accepted it. The second thing this family member found out when they got in there was that the doctors had put a DNR on her file. They put a do not resuscitate on her file. So if she slips into a coma or she stops breathing or her heart stops beating, the doctors were not going to try and revive her. And the most disturbing thing about this is the family were never informed. Okay? The doctors then, or the nurses or whoever was there involved, tried to force this family member who'd snuck in to see her auntie, a great auntie. They tried to force her while she was distressed to sign that DNR, which she refused, thankfully. Thankfully, she refused it. But that just goes to show, what on earth is a hospital doing, putting do not resuscitate on the file of elderly patients without speaking to the family? What on earth is going on there? Second thing, okay, another thing this family member discovered when they turned up to find that they had put their great auntie onto end-of-life care. So not only they put a DNR on her file without letting the family know, they had stopped all her treatment, they'd removed all her IVs, they'd stopped giving her water, they had stopped feeding her, and they were letting her die in the hospital without ever informing the family that that decision had been made. The family member turned up to find a nurse sat in the room, basically waiting for their their great auntie to die. And the family didn't know anything about it. Now, apparently, when this nurse was questioned about it, she told, and she said this apparently in very hushed tones, trying to keep her voice as low as possible so that certain people around couldn't hear what she was saying. They told her that the senior doctors had told the nurses that because she was of advanced age, that she was not worth treating. She didn't have a good enough quality of life. These are the doctors, the senior doctors, had decided she didn't have a good enough quality of life and they were going to stop her treatment. And they did this without informing the family. Let me say that again. They put a DNR on this elderly woman's file. They stopped her treatment, the doctors deciding, senior, medical practitioners deciding that she did not have an appropriate quality of life to continue living. And all this happened without the family being aware of it. Now, if that isn't involuntary euthanasia, murder, then I don't know what is. And thank God, thank source, thank the heavens that this family had their head screwed on enough and cared enough about their great auntie to question what the doctors have said. Because how many people would just have gone along with that and let their family member die in that hospital? That would have just not tried to get access to the hospital when they were told that they couldn't. And they wouldn't have known that there was this DNR on the file, that their treatment had been stopped, that this woman, and this is the bit which really knocked me sick. Apparently they've been refusing her water for so long that her mouth and her tongue were blistered from the lack of water. That's how long she'd been suffering without being hydrated properly. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that it's the doctors and the nurses on the ground that are doing this. They're not making that decision. Okay. Hands up, they are being the order followers, and that is bad enough. That is bad enough. The fact that they are going along with things which in their heart they must know is wrong, but they're literally just following the orders of the senior medical practitioners. I'm presuming it's the consultants, the people who don't actually have to go and see those patients, have decided that a certain person over a given age just isn't worthy of treatment anymore. So if there has been significant excess deaths this year, I would argue that that's probably got an awful lot to do with it. The fact that our elderly and vulnerable have had their treatment stopped, and I've got proof of that now. I know that this woman was refused treatment because the doctors decided that she didn't have a good enough quality of life, playing God. Okay? So they've had treatment stop, people suffered without the cancer treatments and all sorts of other regular therapies that they need. These vulnerable people have also been isolated, which increases stress levels, which increases heart attacks and strokes, and all sorts of other conditions go up when people are isolated and stressed. And all in all, I think when these chips are down and these numbers are actually calculated and true estimates are made of the impact of the lockdown alone before even considering any virus, I think you're going to find that there's some significant issues with the way that the whole system has been run in the first place. Okay. So that's kind of a sort of a general overview of everything that I wanted to say today. We've talked about the excess death, we've talked about involuntary euthanasia, and we've looked through the ONS data. Now, there is another thing that I wanted to sort of very briefly bring up, and I will include this in a little bit more detail when I put my full ONS analysis video together. And the last thing I want you to think about and I want to clarify for you all, is this misuse of terminology that we're seeing. We're seeing an awful lot of misuse of scientific terminology, and it's being jumped on by people who are trying to prove their point without actually trying to find the answer, the true, honest answer to everything that's going on at the minute. And this is the idea of a false positive rate for the PCR test. Okay. Now, when a lot of people spit this out, they are thinking of what are the chances of a single person testing positive for a virus which they don't have. Okay, that's what they're thinking of as the false positive rate, and that's wrong. That is the test accuracy. They are different. Okay, the test accuracy has a given number for the chances of in a single case producing a false positive. It also has data for the chances of a single case of someone who does have the virus, producing a false negative, so giving a negative result when it should have shown positive. So these are the test accuracy values. Okay, the false positive in a single case, the chances of a false positive, and the chances of a false negative in a single case. What the false positive rate means is overall, what percentage of people given a positive result would not have the virus. And this comes down to an estimate of how many people actually have the virus pre-test, presuming this virus exists. So if it's 1 in 10 people, okay, there is, let's just pull some numbers off my head. Let's say there's a 95% chance that this test is accurate in the case of someone actually having it. So in 95% of cases, the person taking that test who has the virus will show a virus. So we're talking 1 in 10. Let's blow this up now to make the maths a little bit easier. So instead of 1 in 10, we will say 1,000 in 10,000. Yeah. If in a population of 10,000, 1,000 people have the virus and 9,000 people don't have the virus. If it's 95% accurate in terms of getting an accurate positive result, then 950 of those 1,000 people would test positive. Okay. On the other side of the equation, we've got 9,000 people. Okay. So how much of let's say that in this case, there is an 80% chance that it's going to give you a negative result when it should have given you, there's going to 20% chance it's going to give you a positive result when it should give you a negative result. So now we've got 950 people who tested positive and should have tested positive. Out of the 9,000 remaining, okay, we've now got 1,800 people who have tested positive who shouldn't have tested positive. Okay, 950 tested positive, should have tested positive. 1,800 did test positive when they shouldn't have done. Okay, so that gives you a false positive rate of about 2 to 1. So for every 2 people who falsely test positive, 1 person correctly tests positive. That is the false positive rate. Okay, this is what people aren't getting their head around. That is the false positive rate. So that, in this case, has a 66% false positive rate. It has a 20%, is a 20% false positive accuracy per test, but overall, in the entire population, that produces 2/3 of people to 1/3 of people who test positive when they shouldn't. That is the difference between the positive rate and the accuracy, and they are 2 fundamentally different things. People think if it's got an 80% chance of testing negative when it should test negative, that's okay, that's reasonably accurate, but no. And this gets even worse if we imagine that, even bigger population numbers. It gets even more ridiculous the number of false positive tests to correct positive tests. That's the false positive rate. Number of false positive results compared to the number of positive results, not the chance of, in an individual case of a test, a positive result being shown. And that is what people are getting mixed up about. And this is why so many people are getting confused about what these actual numbers mean. Okay, so please bear that in mind when you hear people talking about the positive rate, the false positive rate. You've got to think of it in terms of the whole population. This is not the accuracy. Don't get mixed up. This is how they confuse us, because they don't expect us to know the ins and outs of the actual medical literature. Okay, and you're welcome to go out and try and refute me on this. You're welcome to go out and try and find documentation which comes counter to what I'm saying here. But that's the thing you've got to bear in mind, that the false positive rate is different to the accuracy of a single individual test. The false positive rate is to do with the total number of tests overall. Okay? And a very, very small margin of error for accuracy can produce a very large number of positive results. Because in a population, a very large population, you have to expect that most people, to the tune of 90%, probably don't have the illness which you're referring to. 90% of people probably don't have it. It's probably only 10% of people who do. Okay? That 90% is 9 times bigger population than the 10% that do have it. So on the false positive accuracy, it has to be 9 times more accurate to even break even with the number of true positives. And this is why the false positive number has to be incredibly low, why 80% is not good enough, because that produces results where 66% of people who test positive aren't positive, and only 1/3 of those who do are. Okay? So even coming from a mainstream point of view here, even accepting that this virus actually might be real and that their test might work, by their numbers, it's flawed. The data is flawed, the test is flawed, and the final thing, let's talk about and I'm not going to use the V word, I'm going to call it a pancake because I don't want to get banned. Let's talk about the pancake that isn't a pancake. Yeah? And when I'm talking about pancakes, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Yeah? You know what I'm talking about. This sort of pancake. Yeah? So let's define what a pancake is, right? A pancake should be derived from a living organism, either weakened, dead, or sterilized. Okay? That's what this pancake's supposed to do. It's supposed to be made from a living organism which is either dead, weakened, or sterilized, infertile. Okay? The application of that pancake should produce an immune response which makes not only the person who is receiving that pancake immune to the pathogen for which they are receiving the pancake, and it should also stop them from being a vector for that disease. They should not then be able to transmit it. Okay? So let's have a look at the pancake that isn't a pancake. This pancake is not made from a living organism. It is made from synthetic DNA. This isn't even messenger RNA. We've heard this talked about before, being mRNA. It's not even messenger RNA. Okay? This is genetic modification. It is a gene sequence wrapped in a lipid membrane. I think it's PEG 400 that they use for it. And that is intended to genetically modify your cells to have an immune response to not the pathogen, but to a spike protein. Now, spike proteins are these little chains that exist on the membrane of the skin of the cell, and they stick out, and they're a way of communicating and a way of locking together with the cells. It's an attachment point. It's like a handhold for the cells. So the cells will hold on to each other so they maintain their structure. And it's producing an immune response to that spike protein, which is allegedly found on the coronavirus, but is also found on living cells of your own body. This isn't exclusive to this virus particle, parent virus particle. It's not exclusive to that, okay? It is found all throughout your body. So you're encouraging your body to have an immune response to the protein, surface proteins of your own cells, okay? And even more amusing. So not only is it not made from a live, weakened, damaged or sterilized pathogen, living organism, it does also does not stop you from catching the supposed virus. Yeah, even says in the documentation, it won't stop you from catching it. What it's supposed to do is lessen the symptoms which most people never get, right? The symptoms which most people never have. It's supposed to lessen those symptoms. All right. There's no guarantee that it will. So it won't stop you getting the disease. Doesn't provide you. It doesn't provide immunization. Doesn't make you immune to it. Yeah. It doesn't stop you from transmitting it either. All it's supposed to do is lessen the symptoms. So this isn't even a pancake by their own definition of what a pancake is. So don't let them tell you it is. This is genetic engineering. This is not inoculation. This is genetic engineering. They want to modify your genetic code with synthetic DNA. This hasn't been extracted. This hasn't been produced by biological systems. This has been built in a lab. This is biomachinery is what it is. And don't let them convince you of anything otherwise. It's biomachinery. It's not an inoculation. The most disturbing thing I've heard about this pancake, though, is that these spike proteins on the surface of your cells are incredibly important for the connection between the human placenta and the womb, yeah, the lining of the uterus. If these spike proteins get interfered with, that placenta cannot bind with the wall of the womb. It cannot. Okay? And don't forget, we're not just talking about injecting antibodies here. We're not just talking about injecting dead microbes or weakened or sterilized microbes. We're talking about permanent genetic engineering. The synthetic RNA, the synthetic DNA is going to modify your genetic code and turn you into a genetically modified organism. And that's a permanent change. Who knows the number of women that are going to be made infertile by this? It's very scary, very scary. So please, take the time to share this information with other people. It's so important to us right now to reach out to those who are willing to consider alternative ideas. The other thing we've got to be very careful to do is to make sure that we are not, and this is going to be the hardest thing, is recognizing those who are so far gone that you cannot help them. We are coming into a point of triage now. And we're all going to have to make some really tough decisions in terms of who is reachable and who is not. And we need to learn to walk away from those who are unreachable and allow them to make their own decisions. I talk about sovereignty on this channel all the time. And no matter how much you dislike another person's decision, no matter how much you love them, no matter how much you care about them, whether they're your family or not, you cannot make that decision for them. All you can do is point them to the information and hope that they will take the time to understand it. because it's their choice. In a world where this information is available at all of our fingertips, ignorance is a choice. And those who choose to behave like sheep should expect to be eaten by wolves. I'm going to take a couple of minutes now just to have a quick look through the chat, see if there's anybody who's got any questions. If you do have anything you want to ask me about anything I've been speaking about this evening, please do drop a comment down in the chats, either on Facebook or on YouTube. They are both coming up on my screen right now. Thank you very much for joining us, Waking Up. John Overkill, big respect to you as well. JC, yes, things that make you go, And the evidence is right here. You could go and download this ONS data yourself. If you don't believe me, go and download it. Start playing with it. Start having a look at graphs. Figure it out for yourself. Tracy Harris, it's true what you're saying. Yeah, I fully expected it, but to actually have somebody in my life give me that information and to offer it up to me freely like that was very disturbing and very enlightening at the same time. It's all well and good to see Facebook links describing this sort of thing and to hear people claiming about it. But now I've got someone personally in my life who I can point to and say, I know this is happening because they've experienced it. And they've been recording every interaction that they have with the doctors now because they don't trust her. They're at the point now where they want to break her out of hospital because they don't trust the doctors to look after her properly. Tracy Harris also says they give the elders a concoction of drugs, can't stand the way that doctors act, narcissists, most of them, in my experience. Yeah, I think there's a lot of narcissism that goes along with doctors. And I think a lot of that comes down to the regard which they're given by society. And I think a lot of them aren't actually in it because they enjoy doing what they do, or they want to actually help the world and you know, make people better. I think unfortunately a lot of them just do it for A, the respect, and B, the paycheck. And that's the flaw of a financial incentive, that you don't always necessarily get the people who are best at the job. You get the greediest people, the people who value money above all else, that take those jobs. And you know, how many people do jobs that they hate because it pays £90,000 a year and they spent 6 years in med school? You know, it's fairly easy to see why these people get stuck in this. We'll make our own reality, see only what we see. I'm going to try stepping back. I can understand that, Tracy. I can understand that for sure. You're right. It is very important that, particularly in these times, we focus now on the solutions rather than the problems. And I do make a point of usually doing that on this channel. But this has been bubbling within me for months and months now, and I felt like I needed to put it out there. And when I came down this morning to hear this girl talking about these exact details, I knew that this is what I needed to speak about on the stream this evening. It felt like divine providence with me having come to the certain point where I've got something to show you regarding the data, and I've got a personal story to share with you. So thank you very much for spending time with me this evening. Please, if you did like this content, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up and the notification bell set to all. We'll make sure you are always kept up to date when I go live or when one of my videos drops. If you do want to join me and many others and become part of the networks which are going to replace our corrupt government with de jure organizations of the people, whereby we can arrange our own affairs away from the corruption and away from the lies and away from the greed, come and join me on lawfulbank.com. Take care of yourselves, guys. Don't forget to stay free, think free, and always act free. And I will see you next time.